Sorry about that. I am Bill Mosley, and I've been here for a very long time. In fact, I started teaching when my daughter, hey, Clint, um, my daughter was 1 week old when I interviewed for my first job here, and now she is married, 26, and pregnant with my first grandchild. So, so I know, right? And she lives 3 houses down from me, so I'm going to see that kid all the time. So, very excited about that. Um, but I have been in and out of teaching. I've been an administrator. I've been a classified employee. I think I'm one of the few people on this campus who's worked all of the classifications and is still living to tell the tale. Um, but I love Bakersfield College. I grew up on this campus. My grandfather was hired as a football coach in 1953 and retired in 1988. I was on this campus as a student in 93, graduated in 95, and then came back in like 98. So most of my life I've been up here. And I just I love working here. I love being here. I love being a part of our community. So and along the way, I've picked up a few things about instructional design that I'm hoping to share with you today. I will warn you up front, it's going to be like drinking from a fire hose today. It's going to be a lot of information. I don't expect you to take this and be like, I'm going to implement all these things at once. I'm hoping to give you some ideas and some structure for how to think about your classes, how to think about teaching, how to think about better ways to serve your students in the classroom, and some ideas of how to approach it. Like they say, similar to eating an elephant, you do it just one bite at a time. So that's kind of the goal today, not to overwhelm you, but to equip you with some new ideas and maybe challenge you to think about things a little bit differently. So instructional design is kind of a loaded term because when we think of instructional design, a lot of times it's this, right? We have all of these things, all of these acronyms and accessibility and mobile devices and universal design for learning and humanizing online education and technology and SLOs. And like, where do we even start with instructional design? That you can have multiple degrees in instructional design and not know all of this stuff. So you can't know all the things. That's okay. And I tell my students this all the time. I teach computer science. And in computer science, you can't know all the things. I can be an absolute expert in one thing and be completely clueless in another area of computer science. And I have to be okay with that because it's impossible to keep up with technology and with everything that's going on. And so I feel a fair amount of comfort knowing that, because then it just allows me to prioritize and focus on the things that are actually important to me personally. Sort of to frame our conversation, and this is a really cool rock that I saw at a coffee shop in San Diego on vacation. I thought that is a great sort of mantra with a lot of things, right? Do what you can with what you have where you are. Like, be here, be present, think about what you can do right now to just move the dial a little bit. And so to frame our conversation, I'm going to talk a lot about general principles of instructional design. And hopefully you can take those general principles and sort of apply them to your existing situation. I'm going to ask or share with you critical questions that I ask myself as I'm building my courses, because I think those critical questions sort of get you in tune with how to serve students instructionally in more powerful ways. I hope to encourage you. Hopefully I started out on the right foot there with some encouragement that while this task can seem daunting, and I know we've got some adjunct faculty here with us, it's even more so perhaps for you if you're teaching 1 or 2 preps as an adjunct after you do your day job, after you do your family, after you do the rest of your life, to pull it together and still be able to do that without the luxury of being a full-time faculty. And trust me, I understand that. I think the adjuncts are the real heroes in the room here. Every course is going to be different. My good friend Tommy and I were just talking before about the differences between his classes, and he teaches criminal justice, and my classes when I teach computer science, and how we need to teach those courses in ways that are specific to the material. I fully acknowledge that. I can't take my computer science template and force it upon you and say, that's good instructional design, right? So that's why we're doing general principles and critical questions. But there are some things that are universally applicable when we're talking about instructional design, because people who learn are people who learn. And the interesting thing about that is that there's some commonality among all of us in terms of how we look at new information, how we learn things. But beyond that, every single student, every single one of us is an absolute individual with our own stuff. So how do you simultaneously serve those general principles that are all true and the individuals in our classroom who all come with their own background and story and abilities and previous knowledge or lack of previous knowledge, right? So there's a lot there. You'll hear me say this word a lot, and I think it's really important because this is how you get yourself from point A to point B. Obviously, school starts in less than a week. None of us is going to go redesign our course. You're not going to go home from this session and say, I'm feeling really ambitious. I'm going to redesign everything for next week. Don't do that. But here's what you can do. You can pick some things and you can begin to iterate on those things. You can make small changes and observe. Some people like to call that the scientific method. Some people have observed this amazing learning behavior in 2-year-olds as they learn how to, if you hand a 2-year-old an iPad, they will be, selecting movies to download within 30 seconds because they just figure it out. How do they figure it out? They mess around and find out, right? I substituted my word there. But that is the scientific method. It's because you do things and then you pay attention to what happens. So iteration is the key to that. And that's what I would recommend as sort of a way to move forward without being overwhelmed. So in general, what I hope to shift in your mindset is we have this idea that learning and teaching a college class is about covering the material. That is an idea that's been forced upon us for the last 200 years of American education, starting with the Carnegie Unit and ending with the textbook publishers who make their living by hawking information when information should really be free anyway. So if we can shift our thinking from covering the material, how do I get through the textbook chapters in 16 weeks, to how can I leverage these activities to A, cause my students to think differently, and B, assess their difference in thinking in an authentic way, then we're golden. That's huge. So the big picture, mapping the process of instructional design, I liken it to one of these big, disgusting jawbreakers. Have you seen those at the? They look amazing at the candy store. And if you have kids and you've taken your kids to Disneyland or anywhere else, they're going to be begging you, buy me that giant jawbreaker. It's amazing. What they don't tell you as parents is that you can't eat this in one sitting. You can't bite it. And so what you end up with is a really disgusting, saliva-laden jawbreaker that's, 1/3 consumed in like a Ziploc bag. It's just disgusting. But you can't throw it away. The smart thing, here's a pro tip that's not instructional design. Take it outside, hit it with your hammer. Yeah. And you can give them a little piece and say, when you're done with this, we can throw it in the trash and then there's lots more left. They'll be mad at you at first, but they'll get over it really fast. So here's my jawbreaker. And this has to do with how I think about instructional design. So I start at the core with SLOs and objectives. And you're like, SLOs and objectives. Those are the things I put on my syllabus and then I ignore for the rest of the semester while I cover the actual content, right? We'll get to that. Chunking and modules has to do with how you arrange the information in your class so that it's manageable, so that it makes sense, so that it follows a logical pattern. That may be called your course outline in some cases. We'll talk a little bit about authentic assessment, meaning how are we assessing what students know? Not assessment like the assessment committee, but assessment meaning how do I assess that the students are actually getting what I'm selling here. Talk about scaffolding. It's an essential piece of the instructional design process. Knowledge resources, AKA your text. And then finally, communication and interaction. But those are layers that we build in the instructional design process. Here's the interesting thing about that. We should build the course this way, from the inside out. Same way you'd make a jawbreaker, right? You start with a little tiny pebble of candy and you dip it in something, you dip it a million times, and then you get the big jawbreaker. We build the course from the inside out. If we're doing it right, we do. Now, a lot of times, what I see is people start here in that yellow, right? What does the textbook have? And then they build the course. They kind of go everywhere. But you can't start there if you want to end up in the right place with your students. You can't start with the textbook. Textbook should serve you, not the other way around. So we build the course this way. Interestingly enough, the students experience the course in the opposite direction. What do they do first? They interact with you as the instructor. They hear your communication. They see the syllabus. They walk in on the first day of class. Maybe they get a welcome email from you. They experience the textbook. They go to the bookstore. Maybe they pay too much for a textbook, or they see the text online. And then they start to build in, oh, well, I'm starting these scaffolding exercises that help me get ready for the authentic assessment. And they move through the class in that direction. Hopefully, ideally, ending up mastering the SLOs and objectives of the class. So I got to talk about this because it's sort of the elephant in the room. A lot of us look at our class kind of like this. So I know what I want students to learn in my class. I know what I want them to do. And I also have to put the SLOs on my syllabus. And the Venn diagram of those two things usually looks a lot like this. If we're a good instructor, maybe it looks like this. But what I'm proposing is that we work really hard to make that Venn diagram a perfect circle, where what we're teaching in the class is exactly what we've told people that class is about. Because guess what? From an accreditation standpoint, from a course approval standpoint, from a state standpoint, from a program standpoint, we're advertising this course will teach you these things. That's just it. That's ed code. That's the law, is that we have to have approved course outline with SLOs and objectives. We have to teach that. In fact, the accreditation standards, get this, the accreditation standards tell us specifically that we should be awarding course credit and grades based on not multiple choice exams, SLO performance. Not many of us can say that we do that in reality. So a lot of times we see our courses this way. We have the SLOs, we have the real content. This is the stuff I want to teach. This is the stuff we know as instructors what's really important. And we have the SLOs. Who made those SLOs anyway? Where'd they come from? How many of you inherited your SLOs and didn't write them yourself? Anybody feel like you wish you had? I do all the time. So I just do it because I have the luxury of being the only instructor teaching the courses that I teach. But many of us do not have that luxury, and so it's a design by committee thing. But maybe there's a way to make this better. A better instructor might do something like this. We got some SLOs in there. We got the content there. That's a pretty good approach. We're getting a little bit better. A really organized instructor might have real content that sort of stacks up to those SLOs and said, okay, so I've got the real content, boom, 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 and I've aligned it, I've put it together, and it culminates in SLO assessment for each chunk of the class, right? So that's a great approach. Here's another approach that I would like to suggest to you that's even a little bit better than that. And that is, let's surround the SLOs. Let's form our content to target those SLOs. So that the SLO is sort of the nucleus of the cell, and the content is surrounding that SLO, so that we're building that content around those learning outcomes. Because remember, what we're saying about those outcomes is these are the big things you're going to learn in the class. And we assess them, what, one SLO once a year on a 3-year cycle, something like that, if we're good. Otherwise, we just ignore it and pretend like they're not a thing. But I should be able to tell a student at the end of the class, you have passed this SLO, this one, and this one, but the fourth one, you're struggling a little bit. I should be able to tell them that, because that's why we put them on the syllabus in the first place. So thinking about SLOs and content, if I form my content around those SLOs, then I'm moving the student in those direction. But there's one more step that I think is really critical, that's sort of like next level stuff. And that is this. My SLOs and content should look like a neural network. Now, if you're looking at these and you're saying, oh, those look like brain cells. Yes, that's what I'm thinking. Because what we want is not isolated, standalone SLO modules that are strictly used to, like, I'm going to teach you this thing in isolation and we're going to zero in and you're going to get that SLO. This is how people think. This is how it looks like a neural network, because it is how our brains work. And there's a connection between the physical aspects of our brain and the way our learning happens. So if I'm really, really good at what I'm doing, not only am I building that content around those SLOs, but I'm looking for ways to connect it to other things. And those little blue things in the background aren't SLOs in my mind. That is the unique profile of what your student brings to the class. So you're looking not just to connect this material to this material, you're looking to connect this material and this material to these experiences that your student brings to class. How do you do that? Well, it is entirely possible, but maybe not in the current way we teach our classes. And so that's kind of what we're about here. If we start with our curriculum, it kind of should look like this, where you have instructional objectives. They should map to your SLOs. The SLOs should map to your PLOs and so on, all the way up to the ILOs. That's what's supposed to happen. There should be a connection of some kind between your objectives and your SLOs. If there's not an explicit one, you should be able to find it, okay? Here's a question, right? What if the SLOs are terrible? Well, the SLOs are the law. They are the officially approved blueprint for the course. And I have worked with some terrible SLOs. And many of our SLOs are terrible when we get down to using them for instructional design purposes. They're just not adequate, because maybe the person that wrote the SLOs had a different purpose in mind than how can I use these to really guide my instruction. Maybe their purpose was, how can I make my assessment life really easy by writing the most generic SLOs possible that are easy to assess? Maybe that was the purpose. I don't know. I can't say, but what if the SLOs are terrible? You can still iterate on this. You can still look at those SLOs, you can look at the objectives, and you can begin to do something in the short term. And hopefully in the long term, you're using what you've learned in the short term to go back and poke at the department or the SLO owner, whoever that is, the authority in your department. Maybe it's the department decision as a whole, and say, look, these SLOs, here's why I think they might be inadequate. Here's what we can do about it. So once we have the SLOs, little Goonies reference, chunk, chunking the learning is sort of the next thing that we need to think about. And that is, how do we take those things and make them into a sequence or map them to pieces of the class? If for my class, I call them modules. You don't have to use Canvas modules. You don't have to use this terminology. This is just what I use for my class. I use modules. In some classes, it's one module per week. In some classes, it's a little more than that. But it's how it begins to establish a concept of a rhythm in your class, which is important for students. So I might say one of these objectives map to modules on a one-to-one basis. I might have 2 objectives. that map to a module. I might have an objective that spans 2 modules. That's usually just sort of the rule of thumb that I use, because a lot of times we have 10, 15 objectives in a class. And so I'm looking at those. If those objectives make sense to the SLOs and I can provide that map, then I'm in pretty good shape. There may be some MacGyver style working around the current situation involved. This is an actual screenshot of a mapping that I've done for my class. Okay, so I've got my modules, my objectives, my SLOs. You can see it's not like a straight across thing, and there's some split coverage there. But at the end, if I want to, and I do, by the way, I can actually take my students' assessment, my student performance in these modules, and I can use it to submit my assessment results with very little effort. I can take my Canvas gradebook and zip, in about 10 minutes, do my assessment, because I've mapped it very carefully, and it's about the planning and making it work that way. So when I'm chunking my content, here are the critical questions I'm asking myself. Does an objective teach prerequisite skills and knowledge for another? In a lot of our classes, we have to teach them something before we can teach them the thing. And so sometimes an objective serves the main purpose is setting up another objective. That's sort of the culminating. This is the thing that we want them to know, but we have to do this first. Like understanding the scientific method before we do a lab in class, that kind of a thing. So how do objectives build on one another? Does similarity make a difference? Are there objectives like this here? This stuff and this stuff, or this stuff and this stuff go together in this way. So sometimes you can sequence those things to one after another. Sometimes you can't, because it doesn't make sense for the flow of the class. But you have to think about those things. The similarity make difference. Can we group our objectives or our modules around SLOs? Can we double dip? I always think of Seinfeld when I say that, but can we use something and a module or an assignment to meet multiple objectives, or use it in 2 different places? And is there an order that facilitates learning and scaffolding? Okay, we'll talk about scaffolding in just a minute, but when I'm putting together the order of my class, and this is really moving from SLOs and objectives into like a course outline, which you will also have in the curriculum, and which also might be garbage, because somebody might have actually taken the chapters from a textbook and copied them and said, here's the course outline. I've seen it, so I know what happens. Hopefully not, but maybe. So you really want to think about the order of things and how things are grouped together, because that can improve learning performance and make things easier for your students to understand. Now, this is a real soapbox for me, and I'm sorry. But authentic assessment is really important to me, because I don't believe that students should be assessed in a way that doesn't make sense for how they're actually going to be using that knowledge. If I want somebody to learn how to fly a plane, I can't hand them a book about the theory of plane flying and then give them a little quiz on that and have that in any way correlate to their skill in flying a plane. That's why we have a behind the wheel driver's test. And yes, before that, we have a test that requires us to demonstrate understanding of the principles. But the ultimate test of whether you get your driver's license is, can you do that thing? Because we want to know, can you do the thing? We don't want to know, do you know about doing that thing? So measuring learning in a way that replicates the context, the mode, the use, the application of the knowledge as closely as possible. If I'm teaching a class on nuclear reactors, I can't have my student build a nuclear reactor. That's true. But how can I get close to that? What are the critical things about building a nuclear reactor or whatever that my students need to be able to do in a performance-based way. And I challenge any of us to come up with, or any of you to come up with something, and we can do this offline. I'm happy to workshop this with you. Come up with something that you think can't be authentically assessed and must be assessed in a multiple choice exam, and I will gladly come up with some way to assess that differently. The reality is, multiple choice exams test a very narrow idea of knowledge and a very narrow set of knowledge that's not really useful in most cases. What they test is your ability to remember and choose the right option, and maybe some logic there. If they're really well-designed questions, you can edge your way toward something real, but it's never as good as the real thing. So think about real tasks: application, creation, communication. And here are two of my favorite learning theories that support this. Seymour Papert. This guy invented, anybody use Logo on a computer when you were younger? It was a way to learn math where you programmed a little turtle to draw lines on a computer. I still use it with my students, by the way. This guy invented it in the 1970s with a physical robot that was programmable that drew lines on paper. This guy was amazing. He spent most of his life volunteer teaching in a correctional institution for young men who were thought to be unredeemable, but he taught them advanced physics and science concepts using authentic assessment activities. So this dude knows, he has some street cred. So from our constructivist series, for those of you that are learning theory fans, that's Vygotsky and a little bit of Piaget. From constructivist series of psychology, we take a view of learning as a reconstruction rather than a transmission of knowledge. So we're rebuilding our mental structures of things using new information. Then we extend the idea of manipulative materials to the idea that learning is most effective when part of an activity the learner experiences as constructing a meaningful product. Building things, making things, creating things. This is where, if you go back to that neural diagram where I showed you the SLOs, the content, and attaching it to your existing structures, this is where that comes in. Because when we give students the opportunity to create something, they put a little bit of themselves into it. And in doing so, they attach that new understanding to a part of their brain and a part of their thinking that helps it make sense, that changes how they think about it the next time. Here's another one. And if you've done any curriculum development, you ought to know this one. Bloom's taxonomy, an oldie but a goodie. Now, look at this. This is funny because, and I mean funny in the saddest possible way, when we create new curriculum and we write SLOs, they say we will only take SLOs that are from here up, right? And where are we teaching when we teach multiple choice? Here, if we're really lucky, we get to understand. Mostly it's remember. So authentic assessment says, like Papert, let's create something. That is the holy grail of a great assessment, is asking your students to create something that represents or requires them to put into place what they've learned. So sorry, I'm going to call out some things here. Nothing personal. Fallacies of thinking when it comes to assessment. That difficulty equals rigor. Rigor is a terrible word, and we use it in education to justify all manner of terrible behavior, including making the class artificially difficult. Like, I could give you an exam every module that tests the specifics of that module, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it really hard. I'm going to give you 2 exams the whole semester. One's going to be in the middle. It's going to cover everything you've learned so far, and the other one's going to be at the end, and you have to remember everything. And now my class is rigorous. No, your class is difficult. but it's not rigorous. There's no reason. There's no reason. A real life, show me a real life job that behaves that way. We carry around in our pockets a device that has access to a universe of information, artificial intelligence, photos, videos, all manner of learning, all manner of information. What are we doing with that sort of thing? High stakes equals rigor, meaning if you don't pass this test, you can't pass my class. That's what high stakes means. It's the kind of thing that freaks people out. And freaking people out and making them scared of you is not rigor. That does not improve learning. Arbitrary obstacles. Like, if you don't use this font and this, I mean, maybe there's a reason that has to do with their learning. Maybe you just don't like Times New Roman. I don't know. But I mean, obviously, if they use Comic Sans, they fail the class. That's a no-brainer. Or Papyrus. But prove me wrong on that. Arbitrary obstacles is not rigor, you guys. It does not improve learning to give them arbitrary hoops to jump through. Arbitrary means it's not connected to the objectives. Oh, we got to keep our eye on the ball. So I'm preparing my students. It's a tough world out there. I'm going to prepare my students by making my classes unfair as possible. No. It's a tough world out there. Let's let them learn. And then they can, guess what? The world's still going to be tough after this. We don't need to make them tough right now. We just need to teach them what they need to know. We need to focus on the objectives of the class. If the objectives of the class is make your students tough, then you're probably teaching like weightlifting or karate or something. I don't know. But I think your job is to teach the law. That's what I would argue. Your job is to make them experts in the law. And they can, there's arbitrary difficulty isn't helping them. This is my favorite. This is how I was taught, so it must be good. Did you enjoy it when you were taught? Is what I want to ask you. Did you feel like it was beneficial to you, or did you just suffer through it? And if you're here, if you're a faculty member, if you have an advanced education, and you decided to go back into the profession, my guess is you did survive it. But be really critical, be really mindful. Did it help you that it was that way? Oh, this one gets me. But guess what? Number one factor in the faculty adoption of literally anything, whether it's a teaching tool or a methodology, is convenience. And people say, well, I have 800 students. This isn't scalable. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's not scalable. Maybe we need to figure out something else. But I'm sorry, your convenience should not drive how you assess student learning. Don't do this to your students. Don't assume that they're going to cheat. Little side note, it's really easy to avoid cheating if you show them the value of the assignment, if you make the connection between what they're learning and what they're doing. And third trifecta here, third part of that trinity of not cheating is make everything personal. Because guess what? ChatGPT cannot write something on behalf of Bill Moseley that's connected with Bill Moseley's story and Bill Moseley's background and Bill Moseley's existing knowledge set. Does it eliminate cheating? No, you can't eliminate cheating. That's silly. But guess what? You could spend your entire life focusing on preventing cheating and you wouldn't prevent cheating. So what do? You accept that there's a small amount of it, and you teach 90% of your students in a way that really works. So scaffolding, you're probably getting a good sense of what kind of movies I watch. If you've seen this one, it's a classic. If you haven't, you should watch it. Classic Bill Murray. It's called What About Bob? And in this, he plays a psychiatric patient with many issues until he finally meets this brilliant psychologist who's written a book called Baby Steps. And Baby Steps is just scaffolding for life. It is a way of moving towards something without asking your students to jump across a chasm that's too big for them. So forms of scaffolding. Again, each one of these things I could teach a college class on. So I'm going really high level here, but I hopefully this is helpful for you. When you want your students to move toward an objective, asking them to go from 0 to the objective is many times too much. So you want to think about, how can I break this down for them? How can I get them closer to that? How can I training wheels? How can I give them some training wheels that will allow them to get there? All right, so we've got steps in sequence. So you can go A, B, C. You can go general to specific. That's another way to think about things. Like maybe they're not ready for the level of specificity that they need for this, but let's start with something general and then go back and add detail as we move from A to B. Sometimes there are foundational things, as if you're building a structure, you want to start with the basics on the bottom and build up from there. Okay. This is a great one, and it is literally training wheels, right? Reduction of assistance means you start out having them do the activity with assistance. You'll see this in gymnastics, right? When they teach a kid to do a backflip, they don't say, okay, just do this, and then I'm going to show you how to do it, and then you're going to do it. But we do that instructionally all the time, and our students land it straight on their heads. What they do with a student who's learning to do a backflip in gymnastics is they actually hold them and flip them over. And then they help them a little bit less each time they do it, until the student is basically doing it by themselves. And if you've taught a kid how to ride a bike, you'll know that magic moment when you let go of the seat and they're riding by themselves is sort of where it's at, but you don't go straight to that. We all talk about being taught to swim by being thrown in the deep end. That's not really a thing that we do in real swim education. My kids are swimmers. We teach them fundamentals. We teach them to blow bubbles, and then we teach them to kick while holding onto the side of the pool. So reduction of assistance is a great way to do that. Parallel activities. So I use this in my computer science course to demonstrate a principle of something by allowing them to do something that's very similar to that before they do the real thing. And I make it different enough that the students have to be able to employ the principle that I'm teaching in the final product. But this is low stakes. This is for 1 point, let's say. You do it. I'm going to show you how to do it, and we're going to do it together. And then I'm going to have you do something similar on your own. And that's the assessment. That's worth 10 points, let's say. So scaffolding questions, some critical questions to ask when you're scaffolding. What are the obstacles to mastery? You have to know what mastery is. You need to know what it looks like, and you work backwards from there. What are the obstacles? And this is something that's really benefits from iteration in your classes. You've taught this. If you've taught this module 6 times and you know that this is where students struggle, another way that I find out about these obstacles is I ask my students. I do a midterm survey and I do an end of the year survey, and I ask them, what things are hard? What things could I explain better? What things are you struggling with? If I see a pattern, you better believe the next semester I'm going to try something different on that module. So what pieces do my students need to know to succeed? And succeed means, like, do they know how to do the SLO? That's success in my mind. So what are the pieces of that? So I can help them construct those pieces. Maybe rather than having them do all the 5 things that you need to do to swim freestyle, I teach them each piece of it, and then I have them put it together. Or I teach them each piece of it, then I have them put 2 together, then 3 together. There's a way to build those structures. You have to think about, how do you build those structures in a meaningful way in the minds of your students? So a feasible progression of knowledge. I always think about math when I think of this for some reason, but you don't start by teaching them long division, with 6 digits with a remainder where the first digit's not divisible. Like, you don't do that. You start with teaching them, maybe some very basic long division, and you add things. There's a progression there. Nobody likes long division. Let's be real. Um, Come on, you really like it? You're like, delightful. I've never heard that before. It's a puzzle. I like it now, but I didn't like learning it. I'm actually, I have a son. My 12-year-old is learning disabled, and so he's learning long division right now, and it's the some of those concepts. He has a language barrier. He's from Haiti, and so some of the concepts that you to try and explain to somebody who's got limited language. Good Lord, it's really tested me, but we'll get there. We'll get there. It's be interesting going back to working on it this week after having a little break. But anyway, how can I make explicit connections? That's another way to scaffold is to not take for granted that students are going to be able to make those connections themselves, but rather surfacing those connections for them. Because that sometimes, if that, in order to get to point B, in order to get to that SLO, the SLO is complex enough, or that behavior is complex enough, that sometimes you need to surface some of the simpler pieces of that very explicitly. So it's hard to speak very generally about this stuff without having a subject context. It really is. Good scaffolding, low stakes, plus high value, plus personal connection. If you want to be an expert at scaffolding, make assignments in your class that are low stakes, meaning they're not going to destroy people's grades, because high stakes kills bravery. We want your students to be brave and creative and put themselves out there. Try things. We want them to iterate. High value says, I'm going to tell you why you should want to do this assignment, why it's useful to you, how it connects with the big picture. If you don't do that, they'll look at the low stakes and they'll be like, it's only worth 1 point. Why would I do this? I have a scaffolding assignment called a sandbox for every module in my class. Every single one. It is worth 1 point. It makes up the total of those assignments makes up less than 10% of the grade. You can get an A in my class and never do any of them. But 90% of my students complete every single one, because I sell them and I make them fun and I make them personal. Personal connection lowers the cheating, raises the connection of that knowledge to them. It's a building exercise. The whole idea is you're giving them a chance to try things out and see what happens. Be scientists. Okay, so knowledge resources, we're getting into textbooks. I see that I've got I have 10 minutes left? When does this end? Okay, I can do this. I got this. So we're getting to the outside of the jawbreaker now. Knowledge resources. The best ones are bite-size or can be made bite-size. The best knowledge resources are given in context. And what I mean by that is it's really tough for students to say, read this chapter or these 3 chapters and figure out what's important on your own, or you have to guess. It's much better for them to say, here's a concept I want you to learn. Here's the knowledge resource that teaches you the background of that information. And that's not spoon feeding. That is baby steps. That is part of the scaffolding process that builds that knowledge. And honestly, even if it is spoon feeding, if you want to call it that, the reality is, if a student ends the class and they've mastered the SLOs and they really know that stuff, not did they fake it, but do they really know that stuff? If I can get them there, how much does it matter that if I wasn't tough on them enough? You know what I mean? I don't know. That's a philosophical question that I still wrestle with sometimes, because we are all raised in the hard knock life kind of uh, instructional institutions. Um, so in context is very useful to students. In fact, when I video my lectures, I put my lectures in context. I'll take bite-sized 2-minute sections of my lecture and I'll put it with the content of the class for that piece, so they can see I'm reading this, I listen, I do it in that order, and then I'm scaffolding using that. Knowledge resource that's good has a high percentage of useful material. There, I would argue that a lot of our published textbooks have a lot of bloat in them, and all that is a distraction for our students. If you can cut that crap out of textbooks, if your publisher at least allows you to customize them, that's better than not. High value for cost. $180 textbook better bring a whole lot of value to your class. That's all I'm saying. And I put this one in gray because, oof, instructor convenience. I have a hard time saying that. If possible, it should be convenient and easy for you to use. Here's my solution. Okay, I highly recommend looking at OERs and zero cost textbooks. People say, but I have to do so much work, or but I have to make sure that they're valid knowledge sources. I've been a technical reviewer on dozens of computer science books. There are people just like you and me. All it takes is us to look at it and say, yes, it's valid, or no. That's your expertise. That's why you're here. You have the ability to write curriculum. You have the ability to evaluate or even write a textbook. And it's not that bad. But the reality is, if I have an open educational resource, I can chop that thing up. I can remix it. I can put it inside Canvas where I want in context. I can give it to students in bite-sized chunks. The world is my oyster if I'm willing to put the work in. So that's where instructor convenience maybe takes a little bit of a bummer. It also, it's not going to come with PowerPoint and a test bank and all that. I mean, some of them do, but it may not. But do I need that stuff? I don't know. So communication, this is sort of the outside layer. Highly recommend that you get involved with the humanizing online education. Even if you don't teach online, you probably use enough online resources. And if you're not using online resources for your regular class, you should. But here are the 8 pieces of humanizing education. A liquid syllabus, which is a syllabus that is accessible to your students before they start the class outside in a mobile friendly format. Usually it's a web page. You can do it on Google Sites. I actually created a site to host liquid syllabi. The reason you do this is to welcome students to the class, set the context, allow them to think about the course material beforehand. I sent mine out yesterday, and I've already had several interactions with students who are worried or who need something or have questions or whatever. It's great. A humanized homepage. That means in your class, you are doing something that looks like this. Okay, so this is my friendly humanized website. Python is a computer programming language that I teach, and this is the first thing my students see. Okay, this is my liquid syllabus. It starts out with a video of me welcoming them to class and talking about myself. It gives them all the information they need to know. Okay, and in a ton of detail. Okay, one of my favorite parts is this: our learning pact, what I expect from you and what you can expect from me. And it's basically, this is the agreement that we're going to make. Everything is up front. The grading is all there, all of my policies, whatnot, but always focused on making students feel assured that I'm on their team. I want them to succeed in the class. It's never this sort of thing where I'm the instructor and you have to get past me in order to get credit for this class. That idea just, I think, is abysmal. Like, what are we even doing here? So my class website is super slow to load right now. Thank you, Canvas. I'm still connected. So yesterday it wouldn't even let me connect, which was, you know, something. I'll come back to that. Um, but so liquid syllabus, humanized homepage. I do a getting to know you survey where I ask questions like, what are you worried about in this class? What do you think? What are you looking forward to in this class? What are some things I should know about you as a learner? I I read them, but it's just as important for students to think through those questions before they come to class, because then they're thinking about their thinking. Metacognition is a huge asset as a learner, and training them to think about their thinking isn't always easy. Okay. There is an idea called warm wise feedback, or the idea of a warm demander, which means I'm going to expect really good work from you. I'm going to expect you to work hard, to do the things, to apply yourself, but I'm going to do it in the warmest, most supportive way possible. So I'm expecting a lot and I'm giving a lot at the same time. The best teacher, think about the best teacher you ever had. I guarantee they had this nailed. I guarantee it. Even if they were a little bit stiff, like some of us sciencey kind of people are, I guarantee they had the warm, wise feedback. Self-affirming icebreaker, another place for them to share themselves and put themselves in the class. Super important, right? I do a wisdom wall in my classes, which means at the end of the class, I ask my students to give a short piece of wisdom to students that will take this class in the future. What are some things? It's good for me to read because it says, oh, if they're all warning about assignment 8, I better figure that out, right? Assignment 8 is going to kill you. And that's an actual true story. Assignment 8 was tanking people. Right about the 2/3 part of the class, which is a terrible time to thank people. But it's great. It's also nice for students to hear from other students. They feel like they're contributing and giving something back. Bumper videos and micro lectures are something I use. I think I've talked about this. I take my content and I either a bumper video is more produced ahead of time, like a 2-minute explanation of something that students get really stuck on, that they can watch over and over and over, because there are students that need to watch that over and over and over. You don't want to repeat yourself over and over and over. A micro lecture maybe is 5 to 10 minutes on a topic that they can digest. The nice thing about that is that students can do that stuff on the go from their cell phone, and you better believe they will. So here's what the things say. Liquid syllabus says, I'll be a partner in your learning. Humanized homepage says, you are welcome here. Getting to know you survey says, I want to know how to support you. Warm, wise feedback says, I believe you can do this and I'm here to help. And if you're thinking, wow, some of these things feel like equity is baked into your course, you're right. This is equity in instruction at a most basic level, because guess what? People who have traditionally been marginalized in education need to hear these things even more so than the average student. So your values and experiences matter here. Learning is a process of growth. I'm here to help you learn, right? So those are things that your students need to hear from you as the instructor. And that's an outer shell. This is what students experience first. It sets the context for all of the learning in the rest of your course. So here's some practical things that I use in my class. I use scheduled announcements. They're super easy to set up in Canvas. You can set it and forget it. But you know where the critical pieces are in your class. You can use them to establish a rhythm. A weekly module summary. I usually use an announcement for that, but you can send something out special. Be available, whether it's office hours or via email, or you decide your availability and make sure your students feel like they can get in touch with you. Facilitate student-to-student interaction. It's not just good design, it's ed code, guys. Students, if you're in an online course, students need to interact with other students. So figure that out. Um, you want to think about accessibility and accommodations. What's the difference? Accessibility is your course materials are accessible to everyone no matter what. Accommodations say if a student comes to you and says, I have this special need, you will be able to bend your course to make sure that they can master those objectives in spite of their special need. Okay, it's not watering down the course, it's not lowering rigor, it's not lowering your standards. It is that obstacle that they bring with them shouldn't be the thing that keeps them from completing your course. That's how I look at it. I had a student who was deaf and blind in my course who learned how to program Python. He passed my course with a B, which blew my mind. He worked really hard. And I'm not saying I did anything special, but I did work with him to like find some tools that allowed him to complete the course. And he sat in the front row every day and came in, and he could hear a little bit, but mostly he was just in there working and asking questions while I lectured and stuff. So no obstacle. We should try and figure out whenever we can how to do those things. Consider mobile devices. I didn't say everything you do should be done on a cell phone. Okay, don't interpret it that way. If you're an English professor, do I think they should be writing their MLA term paper on a phone? No, I think that's ridiculous. You wouldn't do that in the workplace either. But should we make some content that they can digest if they're waiting for the bus? Gosh, I think that's really cool and nice. Can you learn something while you're waiting for the bus? I do. I listen to stuff all the time. I don't wait for the bus, but I wait for other things. Lots of doctor's appointments these days. And help them be metacognitive by talking about it and also modeling it. All right, so I got to wrap up here, but I'm going to zoom through this last piece. You don't want the rhythm of your class to look like this, where there's very little action, and then in the midterm you have a big test, very little, and then at the final it's a big stress exam. I recommend something like this, maybe where you're starting out a little bit more gentle and you increase the difficulty over time. But the rhythm of a class helps them move through the class in a meaningful way. If you have modules that look like this, where I have an announcement, an introduction, resources, scaffolding, feedback, assessment, feedback. Notice there's feedback after the scaffolding and the assessment. It establishes a rhythm of my class. And if I attach those to weeks, then it allows me to build a class where the students can find that rhythm. Especially important for online classes. In a face-to-face class, the rhythm is your students coming to class Monday and Wednesday at 1 o'clock. That's a rhythm of the class. And you probably have, maybe you build your class around that rhythm, but in an online class, you have to create an artificial rhythm. So it helps students tremendously. So iteration, I'm almost done. 4 minutes over. Ask for feedback. Feels weird to ask for feedback sometimes from your students when a non-evaluation year, but it's the best thing I ever did. Asking students to tell me how I can serve them better has improved my teaching tremendously. Think about things that feel out of place as you look through your class, as you examine what you do. Is there something that just doesn't fit? Where are you getting more student questions or more pushback from students? Or in your current assignments, if you're getting a lot of cheating, something's not right. There's a reason, right? Because students who really want to learn something and you've provided them an opportunity to learn that's possible and that doesn't feel overwhelming and that has value to them, don't tend to cheat. So if you're getting student cheating, if that's an issue for you, think about why. What are the most common points of failure? Where are students just bailing from your class? Either by stopping work or not showing or actually dropping the class. You find those things and eliminate them. and this is a tough one for us as faculty because we don't like to open ourselves to criticism, but ask for feedback on your stuff from other people in your department, from colleagues, from anyone else. Okay. And collaborate with other people. Maybe work on, if you teach the same class as somebody else, maybe work together with them to establish some really great assignments or some ways of doing things that you know many hands make light work, I guess. So that's really it for my presentation.